under the rubric of the University of California is an exceptional experience, let me tell you. It's something that, for those that come from, generally from the Midwest or the East, you don't really understand the University of California until you've been kind of deeply involved in it for some period of time. And what we're going to do today, we're going to talk first about the academic vision, just briefly about what the academic vision is, and then Tom's going to talk about the physical design characteristics of the campus, which I think most of you are here to hear that piece of it. I think one of the things that I would say up front, now I've been there, probably there are 4 of us that are still around that were from the original group that came. There was a lot of turnover after about 4 or 5 years. I mean, this was I always equate it to trying to build a house in a hurricane. We had the first years of Gray Davis where we had all sorts of budget problems, and then I think there were like 2 years that were the eye of the storm, and now we've got, who knows what the deficit is, 20 billion, 40 billion. You hear figures that are all over the place. And the University of California has taken a very significant hit last year. It was close to $1 billion that was cut. Some of that came back in the form of ERA funds. Some of it came back in the form of very, very hefty increases in the fees that we charge for in-state students. So I'd like to say that right from the very beginning that the academic vision really informed the way that the physical plant was developed, but I really don't think that was true until Tom came, to be honest. I mean, I am his warm-up act, but I'm not his shill in this. I think Tom was the first person that really tried to lay out the academic vision as we went through the phases of development, the long-range development plan, and also in the next phase of development of the campus. So I think that was a remarkable thing, and it included people from all over the campus, whether they were faculty, staff, and students were all involved in the development plans. So when you look at the history of the University of California, everybody thinks of Cal, meaning Berkeley, and UCLA, and those were the only 2 campuses for almost 100 years. And then it was kind of like Noah's Ark, only it was 3 by 3, okay? In the 50s, Santa Barbara, Davis, and Riverside came along. In fact, they were there already, but they had different functions. For instance, Davis was the ag campus for the University of California at Berkeley. Santa Barbara was a community college, or a teacher's college, and was taken over by UC. And Riverside was the citrus experiment station that was associated with the University of California. So again, it was an ag campus. And today, the only 2 campuses that have agriculture as part of them are Riverside and Davis. We don't have ag, and we're located in probably the most productive part of the agricultural land in California. And then in the 60s, San Diego, Irvine, and Santa Cruz came on board. And then there was a lull. And Merced was supposed to be the first of 3 additional campuses that were going to come in under the University of California. I frequently say one of our metrics is that we're the first research campus of the 21st century. I also think we're probably the last research campus of the 21st century, given all of the issues that we've had to deal with. So Merced opened in 2005. Groundbreaking was actually in 2002, October of 2002. And the campus opened in 2005 to a founding class that was predominantly freshmen. I think out of the 850 plus students that we had, all but about, Tom's got the figures in here somewhere, all but about 70 or so were freshmen without parental supervision. So this is where we are. If any of you read The Economist, the San Joaquin Valley has been called California's Appalachia. It's an extremely poor area. It's made up of 8 counties, and today it houses something in the neighborhood of 4 million people. The expectations are that it will grow at least to double by 2050 and possibly a little more. And that's not so much by in-migration as it is by very high birth rates. It's a heavily Hispanic population. There's still very large families in this group, and clearly the population is growing a lot just internally without any migration. It has the fastest projected growth in the state, and I think part of the reason that the university and the legislature went forward with a UC campus in the San Joaquin Valley in a very difficult time. I mean, this has not been an easy time for California, as it's not been easy for most states, but California has been hit extremely hard. And I would tell you that the unemployment rate in Merced County is over 20% right now. So it's in very dire circumstances. And as I said, it's majority Latino population. In the town of Merced, it's majority already, and they expect that the San Joaquin Valley will be majority population Latino by 2040. The other major problem in our region is the lack of education. The year that I moved there, the demographics said that the fastest growing group in the city of Merced were individuals that were over the age of 18 with less than a ninth grade education. So that's kind of a scary figure when you think about it, that here are people that are having lots of children and are uneducated and putting a school in an area where potentially you can have a very significant impact on them is a real godsend for the community. And right now, if you look at the outline here, the red line designates what's known as the San Joaquin Valley. If you go back to that other slide, this is the satellite view of the San Joaquin Valley, surrounded by the coastal mountains on the west and the Sierra Nevadas on the east. And I guess there's a pointer here, isn't it? So for those of you that know where Yosemite is, this is Yosemite right here. This is Mono Lake. So, in fact, California's Great Central Valley includes the farther north piece, which is actually the Sacramento Valley as you go farther up, past Davis. But what you notice looking at this is that the 8 counties of the San Joaquin Valley all have extremely poor college completion rates, meaning baccalaureate degree completion rates. In fact, the high school in Merced High, last year boasted that 27% of its graduates were going to college, and that included two-year colleges, okay, as well as baccalaureate schools. And that was an increase over what it had been 5 to 10 years ago, so fairly significant. Coastal California clearly works out quite well for people. I mean, it's an area that is much more highly educated than is the Central Valley. The area around the San Francisco Bay region and the Silicon Valley area has percentages of college grads that are over 30%. And they also have very high percentages of people with graduate degrees, which isn't indicated on here. So here's the time frame for the establishment of Merced, just like we had the time frame for the development of all of the UC campuses. The first discussions that I've been able to find were actually by Clark Kerr at a Regents meeting that was held in 1959 in Fresno. And he said that the University of California would need to have a 10th campus in the year 2000, and it would be in Fresno. Well, he missed by 60 miles. Merced is about 60 miles north of Fresno. So in 1995, the site was selected, and a new chancellor was appointed in 1998, Carol Tomlinson-Kesey, and she actually just died about 6 months ago, I guess now. All of the senior administration were appointed in 2001 and 2002, and the first faculty started arriving in 2003. Now, at that point, there was still pressure from the Davis governorship to open the campus in 2004. So that was the reason that some of these things were kind of moved up. We had no facilities, nothing at that point in time. In fact, when we opened in 2005, all of the classes were held in one wing of the library. That was the only building that was open when we opened the campus. The second semester, we got the class and office room building. The third semester, we got the science labs in the science and engineering building. So really, when you look, one of the things that I'm sure faculty at NYU are not much different than faculty at UC. They all see themselves not as regional players, but as world players. And I kept, as provost, I kept trying to convince them that we have to have a regional impact. And finally, it kind of rang home that we are a microcosm of this world. I mean, if you go in and you look at either the UN or the UNESCO websites, the major problems that the world has to solve are the major problems of the San Joaquin Valley. It's sustainability, both environmental and cultural sustainability. It's poverty. It's what else do I have in there? Education, and it's health. And those are the key issues in our area as well as in the rest of the world. So people that are faculty members at UC Merced can both be world players, but they can have a real regional impact. And we're trying to think globally, but act very locally. if you remember that old saying, was that David Bowers or Bowers, Sierra Club. So here we are right now. We're 122 faculty. It's actually a couple more than that. We have about 830 staff, 3,414 students, 650 alums. We're getting there slowly. Last year we had $23.5 million in research expenditures, which basically puts us on a par with all of the other campuses, all of the general campuses in UC, at about $200 and some odd thousand per faculty member, including the humanities faculty. Okay. But what we have that's different than all of the other the faculties on the other campuses is that we are about 60% junior faculty. They're 60 to 70% senior faculty. So clearly our best years are still in front of us. Okay. A space, we've got about 500,000 square feet under roof. And there are 815 acres, Tom's going to talk a little bit about this, 815 acres that have been okayed for campus development that are part of the long-range development plan. Only 104 of those, which were on a golf course, have been actually developed. And right now we have about 1,000 beds. Next year we'll have 1,350, and we have 1,135 trees. People always ask me about the trees, because if you look at any other UC campus when they first started, and the one that I always look at is Irvine, there wasn't a tree in sight. Now Irvine has over 11,000 mature trees, and so clearly it's a metric that I think we should continue to keep. So what were our challenges? And the biggest challenge we've had is the location, to be perfectly honest. It's a very, very difficult place to build a campus. It's a small town, about 85,000. It's a very poor town. It doesn't have a lot of occupations outside of agriculture. Ag is the 900-pound gorilla in Merced, and it basically is about a $2.1 billion industry. And you wonder, why is the county so poor? Well, most of the people that own those very large farms and orchards, they actually live over on the coast, so they don't live in Merced. Lots of compared to the 1960s, and I think the Office of the President was looking back at the 1960s and thinking that nothing had changed in those intervening years, and the funding model that we received for our budget was basically built on a 60s model, and it didn't work. Even the Academic Senate, not ours, but the system-wide Academic Senate, came up with numbers that were exactly the same numbers that we came up with in terms of the shortage. The cost of information technology, the cost of financial aid. University of California, if you're from a family that makes under $70,000 a year, you don't pay any tuition. Okay, you don't pay any of the fees. It's basically written off as part of a financial aid model that the University of California has developed, where a third of everything that comes in the door in terms of fees and state aid actually goes in return to aid to the students. There was also the lack of a significant business plan to build out the campus past phase one. That was another huge impediment, and we've been fighting that battle since day one almost, in terms of trying to get the infrastructure that we need. We were put on a green field. Basically there was nothing there except there was a golf course, okay, and people carrying clubs, I guess. So what were the key academic principles? I mean, we wanted to provide a high quality research and educational experience in a very historically underserved area of the University of California. And I will tell you that since it was announced that UC was going to be placed in the San Joaquin Valley, that the college-going rates throughout the San Joaquin Valley have actually jumped up. They were about 4% of the kids were actually attending either a UC or a Cal State University. Now it's up to about 8%. So we've worked very hard with outreach programs trying to make kids understand, make their families understand what the value is of a four-year college degree, and also to give them ideas about the financial model that we use in order to maybe relieve some of the burden that they feel they're going to have to take on. Every UC campus is basically required, whether it's written or not, to build areas of distinction. And we have started down that path. From the day we opened, people would come up and ask, well, what are your areas of distinction? Well, we just opened the doors. We kind of expect that the faculty will develop those over a period of time. But we have gone forward with developing, as the faculty has grown, there are some really key areas. I mean, I showed you some of them on the UNESCO and the UC Merced, or the San Joaquin Valley as a microcosm of the world thing. And I'll show it to you again. We have focused on student success. We have a population, let's go back to that in a second. We have a population that is among the most diverse campuses in the country, okay? You can see 32% Latino or Chicano, 31% Asian American, 24% white, 7% African American. In fact, we have more African American students than UC San Diego has. We had more African American students a couple of years than UCLA had. And we've got about 1/10 the population that they have. Okay? So clearly this is an interesting experiment. And in fact, in our first graduating class, the group that was the most successful in terms of four-year completion rate were the African American students and the Chicano students, Latino students. More successful than either the Asian or the Caucasian students were. Oops, what did I do here? So building areas of distinction. We have no departments on our campus. We have 3 schools. Okay, there's School of Natural Science, School of Engineering, and a School of Social Sciences, Humanities, and Arts. No departments in those schools. And the core principle from the very beginning was to be interdisciplinary and to try and to bring the capacity from all of the different elements of the faculty towards problems that are serious problems in the world. Has it worked? To a certain extent, yes, but not the way we thought it would work. I mean, I think that the momentum or the inertia that you have to overcome to be totally interdisciplinary is so great, and the momentum to establish disciplinary bases is so driven by the way people are educated at the PhD level, that when they come in, one of the first things they want to do is to congregate themselves in small groups that are very disciplinary in their organization. They also want to have research centers, and that's where the interdisciplinary activity is. We tried early on to do the same thing with the undergraduate educational program, and in fact, it failed. The students wanted discipline-based things. We had 9 majors when we opened, and they were all very broad by necessity because we had a very small faculty. We had to have broad majors. But they also were very interdisciplinary, and they were around big problems. The students wanted psychology, they wanted biology, they wanted sociology, they wanted humanities, English, whatever. And they didn't want these very broad-based things because people in their schools, their counselors, their parents were telling them, you need to be a biology major so you can be a doctor or dentist or whatever. So we've tried to build our interdisciplinary activities around the research efforts and the establishment of research units as being the interdisciplinary unit on the campus. And ultimately, I think the research units that we're developing will be the pathway towards developing new schools. And I presume we will have a medical school sometime in the future. I presume we will have a school of experimental design, or of environmental sustainability, or experimental design. I think we will have a school of management at some point. I mean, again, those are the big problems. I address the big problems in our community. Community culture and identity. The area of the San Joaquin Valley supposedly has 100 different languages that are spoken by the people in those communities. I can't name 100 different languages, sadly. And also the dynamics of social and economic progress. I mean, again, trying to look at issues of justice, and our chancellor always talks about the one community in particular where he went and got water out of the tap and the water was brown. So I mentioned the diversity of the students. The other thing that I didn't mention on this slide was that 51% of our kids are first in their families to go to college. And I mean, this is a huge thing for us. I mean, it's something that we really pride ourselves on. And in fact, the graduation rate, admittedly it's a small population, but the graduation rate that first year, we were not that much different than many of the other UC campuses were just 10 years ago. So I was pretty proud of what we had done with the students, both in terms of retention and in terms of getting them through on time. 47% of our kids are Pell Grant eligible, and meaning they're from very poor families, and that puts a huge burden on us for financial aid for the students. Next year, we hope that we will be in the area of 4,050 students. 2020, we're planning for 11,000 students, and full development is supposed to be 25,000 students when we ultimately get there. We have 19, right now we have 19 majors. We started off with 9 that were these broad disciplinary things. We now have 19 undergraduate majors, and you can see the list of them. I don't need to read them. They're fairly traditional majors, and it's kind of surprising, but it's what we ended up with. We also have 9 graduate areas. These are much more interdisciplinary in their focus than are the undergraduate majors, and we've grown the graduate student body. It's mostly PhD students, very few master's students. It's mostly PhD level students. We've grown it each year, and we're trying to move, in the next 3 years, we're trying to move the graduate student population to 10% of the student body, which would mean about 500. So we have to double this number in the next 3 years. And the applications would support that at this point. What we don't have are the money to support the acceptances. That's clearly still a big issue for us. So finally, let me just say that I think when you look at this focus on student success, it's taken lots of forms. I mean, this first group of students that came in was, to me, a totally remarkable group of kids. I mean, they came in, and over the course of their time there, they started over 100 clubs and organizations. Now, obviously, the classes grew as the years went on between the time they started and the time they ended. And so they were extremely entrepreneurial, and I think the height of their entrepreneurship was actually luring Mrs. Obama to come and be the commencement speaker a year ago. And they did it all by themselves, truly. On Valentine's Day, they sent her 1,700 Valentine's Day cards. And then they put together a Dear Michelle campaign that they made a video of what her visit to the campus would mean to the area. They wrote a letter that wasn't about them, it was about the area and the poverty and the needs of the area. It was pretty spectacular. One of the real advantages that we have is Yosemite, which is fairly near us. It's about an hour and a half away. And we have extremely good relationships with the park, both Yosemite Park and Sequoia Kings Canyon Park, which is a little bit south of Yosemite. And our kids work out there. They are in internship programs. The Natural Park Service actually wants them to come and work. They're looking for a diverse workforce, just like colleges are looking for a diverse workforce. This coming 2 weeks from now, we have Jimmy Carter coming to talk to a group of national parks experts. We're putting on a course that's specific for parks experts from across the country, and actually there are people from other countries that are coming also. So that relationship is a pretty spectacular relationship for us. So let me give it to Tom, and I will sit down. Thank you.
Good evening. Let me ask, how many of you are architects? Okay, so it looks like it's about 80% or so. Others are planners? All right. Here's for the planners in the room. And others, I presume, are just interested, or they're administrators with the university? Or faculty members, maybe. Any faculty members? All right. Well, we have Keith, too. I'm going to talk about the physical vision here and sort of how we got to it. We had a relatively engaged public process on the campus, which I don't think I have much of in this presentation, but it was, I don't know if you remember the slide with the fireworks, but that was the night before classes opened. Well, that was the night before my first day of work. So a lot of what had happened in the initial construction and design and planning of the campus had been done before I arrived. It was when I arrived that I had to sort of finish up the buildings and get people moved in, negotiate all the claims with the contractors, and then sort of plan for the next phase of development, as well as for the ultimate future of the campus's build out, because they really only had a permit to build on about 100 acres of this 7,000 acre property. And they were seeking additional permits, or a federal permit really, to build on the rest of it, because it had been declared part of a natural habitat for something like 9 endangered or listed species, including the fairy shrimp. And it was a sort of a pristine vernal pool grassland. So the future of the campus wasn't so much in doubt in terms of whether or not it was going to happen, but what it was going to be. And we took the opportunity that the early planning had been done with a team of consultants working with about 5 to 7 university employees who had been sort of hired or assigned to help plan UC Merced through the Office of the President. So with that as a little background, I'll share with you some of the things that I brought to the story, which was I'd spent 15 years working at Berkeley. Berkeley was the oldest campus in the system, so we learned every mistake that could be made, at least so we thought. And we learned what it was like to work with a community that was hostile to you. We learned how to work on a campus that had no real effective access to it, because none of the transportation planning that had been done in the course of time leading up to Berkeley's history had really provided very good access to the campus. So we learned some of the importance of that. And so understanding how this campus was going to link to the development of Merced itself was an important part of what we were trying to do, particularly since the Regent's located on a site that was about 6 miles out of town. The other thing was that early decisions that you make really shape the future of the campus. We had done this landscape heritage plan, this historical analysis of UC Berkeley, and we saw how Olmsted's plan from the 1860s to Galen Howard's plans of the early 1900s, and then ultimately Tommy Church's plan in the 60s, sort of informed our planning going forward, and how certain pieces of that sort of stayed in place and kind of informed what we were going to be doing. So it was really important to pay attention to the entirety of the plan and not just the piece you were trying to build right then. The other thing, of course, is that it's really the space between the buildings that makes a campus. It's not the buildings themselves. If you look at Rice University, you know, they planted 4,000 oak trees, I think, when they opened that campus. And right now, it almost doesn't matter what you build, as long as you don't cut down the oaks. It looks like it belongs there, you know. I mean, there's a very good architectural fabric to that campus, don't get me wrong. But the landscape, as Keith mentioned earlier, is pretty important. So understanding how that shapes the character and placemaking in the campus was important. Another one, of course, was that styles and technologies change. I think they're learning that here at NYU, trying to turn houses into academic buildings, or high-rises, or warehouses. You know, you can change use of buildings over time, and the academic programs will shift. So building, you know, a loose-fit campus where buildings have the opportunity to change over time, but the initial underlying structural investment in the 50-year envelope or the 100-year frame is a really important part of what we were trying to do. And finally, this notion that the proximity to housing was critical to create an academic community. At Berkeley, when we did the long-range plan there, we looked at not just the 20-minute walk, we looked at the 20-minute bike ride, and we looked at the 20-minute bus ride. So these sort of fingers that you see going out into the Berkeley community were really areas that they had zoned for high-density housing. So understanding how housing was going to work with the overall plan was a really important part of what we were trying to do. So the Regents, in their wisdom, selected this site of 2,000 acres outside of Merced, in part because it was quote-unquote free land. The Virginia Smith Trust owned a 7,000-acre piece of land. They thought they'd give 2,000 acres to the university. They'd sell the other 5,000 over time and be billionaires by the time this thing was done. And the reason the Virginia Smith Trust wanted to be billionaires was because their mission was to fund scholarships for Merced high school students to go to college. So they had an educational mission as well. So it was a very grand idea. The only problem is, in the end, we only got a permit to build on about 500 of these 7,000 acres. So there's some shifts that took place subsequent to that. But there was also this notion that they wanted a contiguous community. Part of that had to do with California environmental law. The idea was to take on 100% of the direct and indirect effects of creating a new campus by building a community next to it that would essentially provide all the housing and the jobs and the other things that would spin off of the campus. Now, it wasn't so much an economic strategy as it was a planning strategy, but you'll see that over time, as we've tried to implement it, it's also become somewhat of an economic strategy for us as well. It's also built on the edge of the farmland rather than in the middle of it and where there's a good water supply. So the blue areas represent the original 7,000 acres with the exception of the piece that says University Community to the south, so the darker blue areas. This is the Vernal Pool Map of the site, and the original thinking was that they would build this campus up on the top of the hill, but unfortunately the downstream watershed effects would impact all 7,000 acres of vernal pool. So they changed their mind and they went to this plan where the campus was down in the lower left-hand corner, which is this dark blue area. And then the university community that was going to surround the campus was now going to move to the south. You can see there the general plan. I think it's the 1998 general plan, I think, for the city of Merced. Merced is currently about 80,000 people. They now expect to be 280,000 people or 240,000 people by 2050. And we talked a little bit about the planned growth in the Central Valley. Whether they'll get there or not is a question that's still open, but they're now making plans for that. So they're literally doubling the incorporated land area in the next general plan process, actually in part to incorporate the university and the university community in that plan. This was the plan that was done in 2002, approved by the regents. I think 2004, the county approved the university community plan. The purple area to the top, well, this was the quick start 100-acre campus that didn't need any federal permits. So that's where they started building the campus. And you can see it was sort of the southwestern corner of what was going to be the academic core. And the academic core was going to be up against the lake. And then the student neighborhoods were going to be to the east, and then the regular, the rest of the neighborhoods in part were going to be to the south. The red area was a commercial, residential, sort of a higher density residential district. The blue area was a 22-acre business park, and this was the notion of how this was all going to fit together and work. Now, there is this sort of geographic characteristic of the campus where these two bowls sort of run crosswise to the campus, and the topography is moving in that direction. And so that was kind of the open space separator between the campus on the hill, if you will, and the rest of the community. What happened in the negotiations with the federal agencies is we had to sort of give up a fair bit of that portion of the campus in our negotiations. So it basically hit the reset button on the campus plan, and there's the 100 acres again. So we reshaped the campus, whittled it down to about 800 acres. We gave up about a 340-acre development reserve, so now we had to build enough capacity in this 800 acres to accommodate not just the earlier 900 acres, but really about 1,200 acres of development. And we looked then also at the 2000 series of long-range plans for the other University of California campuses, and we looked at sort of a benchmarking about, okay, if you've got this much space per student FTE and we're going to be 25,000 students, how much space do we need? Now, I'll say this here because I'm not in California, but part of the game was to get the federal agencies, the EPA, the Corps of Engineers, and the Fish and Game folks to lay back a little bit and give us some land to tell them, look, we're going to be building this whole thing at 6 stories, right? There's no place else to go. You can't make the regents go buy more land. And besides, they got 6,500 of the 7,000 acres anyway, so we sort of cut a deal with them, I should say. The other part of the agreement with them was that the university community could expand to the east a little bit. You'll see that sort of blank area in the red. The southern portion of the community pretty much stayed the same. And in that process, the state had put up about $20 million to buy out conservation easements on nearly 30,000 acres of vernal pool grasslands in the area. So you can see that now the campus is located in the sort of the northeast corner of the city of Merced, but it's up against a landscape that just isn't going to change forever, unless something happens with wetland regulations. The campus, as I mentioned, is located about 6 miles out of downtown Merced. The planned high-speed rail system is going to have a stop in downtown Merced, hopefully. At least that's the current plan. They're now trying to argue for the maintenance facility as well, hoping for the jobs that come with that. But you can see that setting up regional access to the campus is going to be really important to us. So these are the planning areas that we're working with here. This is an aerial photograph of the campus taken about 2 years ago. You can see the one on the upper right there is yeah, okay, if I can get it there. This one was taken, I think, while the initial phases were under construction, but you can see this landscape we're talking about. I mean, there's just nothing between the campus and the Sierras. There's also virtually no infrastructure to the south as well, right? So here you can see phase 1 of the campus. We really only developed about 50 of the 104 acres, really. We put infrastructure on about 30 acres of it, and we've been sort of struggling ever since to try to build off of that infrastructure. So here's the way the campus plan took shape. This is, you can sort of read the topography, you planners and architects in the room, hopefully. It's running from the northeast to the southwest. The winds come in off the lake in the summer. They come from the south in the winter. Sometimes our winds get up to about 80 miles an hour, so that's a real design factor for us, particularly when you're trying to use sun shading systems that have to sustain the kind of uplift that 80 mile an hour winds might do. We also have this really interesting character of these 2 irrigation canals that were built in the 1860s that run through the campus sort of on an even topography, right? One's at about 250, one's at about 220 elevation. So each portion of the campus is about 30 feet above the one below it to the left. And that's going to become a really key part of the planning, as you'll see. And then this issue of 320 days of sun per year is really part of what convinced us, or we were able to convince the Chancellor, I should say, and the regents, getting the students and the faculty behind it, that really, if we couldn't become a net zero campus, who could? So we thought we should be the model for that kind of development in the Central Valley, particularly given the growth that was expected to occur over the next 40 to 50 years. So the basic land use organization of the campus was this academic core, 200-acre block, very similar in size actually to the campus park at UC Berkeley, not just because that's where I worked for 15 years, but because it's about a 10-minute walking radius around that core. So the class change metric of the core campus was really important. If you draw other 10-minute radiuses, you'll see that the heart of the core is about a 10-minute walk from any student neighborhood, as well as the town center. And then this 10-minute bike ride from the southern part of the community up to the core of the campus was another principal planning metric that we were attempting to use. We then sort of took this basic land use concept and tried to organize both the campus and the community plan at the same time, and to integrate their circulation systems, transit planning, open space networks, and open space systems so that it was one sort of grand plan. We are working now on the finalization of the community plan itself for the northern section of it, but what I'm going to take you here through for the most part is the campus plan itself. So we have this compact, car-free academic core. It's served by transit. Right now we're on the Merced bus system. Obviously it's not a very intense transit system, but at some point we expect that the campus corridor, the campus parkway corridor, may actually provide light rail or rapid bus transit from the high-speed rail system, because we're really the campus for the Central Valley, not just for Merced, right? So getting access to the campus through the Amtrak station and through the high-speed rail system will be an important part of our design future. So we wanted to make sure things were within a 10-minute walk of the transit center. The student neighborhoods wrap around the upper portions and eastern and southern portion of the campus. And then one thing that's somewhat unique in new campus planning, for places like NYU that sort of evolve over time within an urban community, it's sort of just part and parcel of who you are. But for a conscious plan to sort of embed student housing running on these main streets right through the academic core was a real key notion of creating a 24/7 active student campus environment. We actually ran the faculty and students through multiple scenarios, and one of the scenarios we used actually was an NYU scenario where the town center, the Gateway District, the hotels, the bars, the shops, the businesses, were all just one big core area, as opposed to a separate academic core. But the feeling was they really wanted the academic core to have a specific identity, but they wanted all these things really close and tight. So in addition to the town center, which will have about 400,000 square feet of commercial services, in addition to apartments and townhouses, well, I forgot about the open space. That's in there too, right? That's part of the notion is that these student neighborhoods actually are connected across the open space, and the open space separates them from the academic core. And then we have this gateway district, and this can house up to, I think, around 1.5 million to 2 million square feet of space under its current zoning. Whether it'll ever get that intense in our lifetimes, I doubt it, right? But in the second, cycle of development, it may very well end up there. And the other thing we wanted to do is preserve the capacity of the campus to develop a medical center. If there is a medical program in its early years at Merced, more than likely it will be a distributed system where people do their clinicals throughout the Central Valley. But we wanted to maintain the capacity in the system to be able to accommodate that kind of growth. So again, I just want to talk about the circulation because it's really important for the sustainable metric of the campus. Our planning analysis is based on capturing 70% of trips within the campus community or within the campus, right? So you just don't have a lot of people, cluttering up the roads, or the ones that do use the roads in the neighborhood or within the community are going to be using the transit systems or the bikeways. So the challenges we face, I mentioned these canals, they're really interesting design opportunities, but they're also not inexpensive, right? A bridge is going to cost you about $1 million to $2 million, depending on whether you're putting utilities across it. But it does give us a chance to really make that part of the campus's character. I was out photographing bridges the other day in Central Park to show all the different kinds of bridges that you can build, right? So they're all character elements. Francesca had to watch me take a lot of pictures yesterday. Anyway, the other thing is that the infrastructure is something that you can build district level and system-wide infrastructure that speaks to the mission of sustainability. An example of that is that we presently have about, I think, 12 base credit points through the LEED scoring system that, and under the new system, I'm sure it's a few more, but the notion is that if you build a building on our campus, you're already starting with a 12-point head start toward your LEED rating. We expect to expand that to about 24 base points, to 30 actually, over the course of the next year. And what that will mean is that we're starting almost at LEED silver by just building a building on the campus and tying into the systems and building according to our standards. As it turns out, what these campus-wide systems have allowed us to do is that while our initial goal was to hit LEED silver as a minimum target for new buildings, virtually all but one of the buildings has been rated or is scheduled to be rated LEED gold. And the next 3 buildings that have been targeted for LEED gold are likely to hit LEED platinum. So it's one of these things that if you start with a sustainable attitude in the early stages of planning your projects, it's really not that hard to get there in the long run, and that all these systems just sort of build on top of one another, right? They reinforce one another. Energy is an important one in particular, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Using the campus topography to make for placemaking has also been a really interesting opportunity for us, and this notion of a blank canvas. I had a lot of people ask me why I would go from Berkeley to Merced, and as you can see from the photographs, it's a very different place. It's from a blue county to a red county, if nothing else. It was one of, earlier in my career I'd worked on new cities in Africa and Asia, and I just thought, wouldn't it be nice or interesting to do a new city somewhere in America and see what it's like to try to make that happen. And my judgment so far is it's a lot easier to make it happen in another part of the world than it is to make it happen in California. They talked a little bit about earlier, these awards were mentioned, but I think it's a credit to all the design professionals that we've used on this campus who really, they come on, they get it, they get the energy for it, the building committee sort of get excited about it, and it becomes part of what we're trying to achieve with each new project. Our science and engineering building, for example, has basically the mechanical roof system is designed with a frame that you can mount solar systems all over the roof. So it's part of the research component of the program, as well as being part of the building's infrastructure. So we're achieving 40% water savings with our projects. We expect to drop that consumption rate down in terms of potable water to about 20%, because we're going to go to non-potable systems for our irrigation. We just had to get a big enough scale that we could achieve that. We are hitting energy targets that are 50% below buildings that would have been built under standard codes at this time, and that's under California's standards of development under Title 24, which are already about 20 to 30% below national energy consumption standards. This was done in partnership with the California Energy Institute, who helped us establish these benchmarks, and it was come back in and work with our facilities folks to sort of do the readings and the post-occupancy analysis and help us sort of tweak the systems that are all managed through the central plan, our building monitoring systems. So there's been a lot of sort of energy around this notion of saving energy, and it's really paid off. It's already saving us about $1 million a year in our energy bills. In addition to getting these rebates from PG&E, the solar system you see there is actually generating 20% of our on-site energy, 20% of our energy requirements on-site. It's about 60% of our peak load, which is the most expensive load. So that's one of the reasons why we're experiencing those kinds of savings. The implementation strategies that we're using include our land use plans, our infrastructure program, our building standards, our site design standards, and so forth. And I don't have to read these for you here. I'm just doing a time check. So I think that I'll talk a little bit more about the physical characteristics of the plan. So we have this academic core, and we've turned it into districts, right? So now we're developing district plans. The North District is the one that's under construction now, if you will, where the first several buildings have gone. And then we see these future districts evolving over the coming years, probably in about, I would say, 10 to 15-year increments. The student neighborhoods have very clear, from an urban design standpoint, very clear boundaries and edges, and take advantage of their relationship to the topography as well. And they also have very clear centers. So we're concentrating in our programming within each student neighborhood, and each one of these might represent somewhere between 1,500 and 3,000 students. That the food service, the recreational programs, the student support systems, tutoring and seminars and things like that, the sort of the social aspects of student life are all concentrated in these centers. Part of what we're really attempting to do is to help our students who are coming from many rural communities to understand what it is to live in a city and what it is to live in a community and participate in a social fabric. Because we're all going to be living, I think as of 2007, more than half the world's population lives in cities. And so learning how to live in cities is really important. Our student services are not overly concentrated. They're distributed throughout the neighborhoods in our plan. There are large centers and small centers. The idea is you're never more than 5 minutes from a Red Bull or a cup of coffee, so you can keep your studying up. Or you can meet a friend or a colleague. And recreation is also distributed so that it's a healthier, more accessible environment. In other words, you don't have to get in a car, you don't have to go all the way across campus if you want to go for a run or play a game of some kind, or go to a yoga class. Right now it's easy to say that because we've only got one recreation center, right? So we're building the microcosm early. The other thing about the open space in the campus is that it's a pretty dense campus for something built in such a rural area. So it's a really different metric. Our densities here are something like 4 to 5 times the densest environment in the Central Valley today. So part of what is helping to drive that actually is the lack of funding for infrastructure, right? So on our campus now, we've been in this debate with our system-wide officials about moving down into the bowl, but it's going to cost us, $20 to $50 million worth of infrastructure to get there. And they say, well, gee, wouldn't you really have $20 million for a building? And we go, well, yeah, we would. So we spend $1.5 million on the infrastructure, and we build the building next door to the buildings that we have. But taking advantage of these views out over the open landscape or down into the central bowl, which is where the recreational programs are going to be, is a really important part of the planning. And it's built into the guidelines that these buildings sort of have to face those spaces and orient toward those spaces to help create this strong public environment. The grid is an important part of the plan. Understanding that each move you make is building that grid. Planning where the energy centers connect into that grid is an important part of that process. The architecture, now I'll just walk you through that a little bit, is really trying to derive from some of the underappreciated agricultural structures of the Central Valley so that it really is of that place. Very simple, honest materials. There's no marble, there's no granite. There's no budget for that, and there's frankly no interest in that. We're really interested in the sustainability of these buildings. And building off of that architectural partie, we think we're creating a really unique place that uses light and shadow and shading and structure and form all together to create what really is a very different place, right? So the permeability of the wall plane is important. How we organize spaces for interaction. One really interesting aspect of what we're doing here is all the vertical circulation is principally daylit. It's visible from the outside of the building, so you know where to go. You can orient yourself for entrance. Also, these arcades that provide shading systems also provide all the ground floor circulation, right? So all the classrooms and the laboratories that are on the ground floors open directly out onto these arcades. It's not a single controlled building entrance. It's multiple entries. So it's more like a university in Bologna or something like that, right? Where it really engages the public realm. You can see a little bit of that here in these slides. And here you can see some of how the permeability of the wall really sort of makes a special place. We're using the roof forms to create a skyline, if you will, in Merced, which it doesn't really have except for the county tower. And we're drawing our colors from the valley palettes. The landscape of the Central Valley is a very, very dramatic landscape. These big sweeping vistas. On really clear days, you can see the coastal mountains in one direction, and you can see the Sierras in the other, sometimes with the snow. Other days you can't see past the hood of your car during the Thule fog. So it's and then when you approach the campus, it's this luminous sort of mystical thing up in the fog. And we're building these landscape typologies of the valley as part of the campus landscape fabric. So with that, I'm just going to walk you through. This is a few projects that are in construction. This is a housing project. It's going to have about 350 beds, which will increase our housing stock by 30%. This is a social sciences and management project that will open in 2011, and this building will house both the incubator for the business school as well as the arts program. The business school is sort of the more restrained front side, and the back side along the canals where the arts program will go. That will increase, I think, our academic space inventory by about 25-30% as well. So each new building is a very important addition to our fabric. This is our science and engineering building, which will be is in design right now. It'll be opened in 2014, and this will probably end up being where the School of Engineering is based, as opposed to the other building you saw, which is presently science and engineering, and will probably become more a science-based program. This is part of that project, sort of overlooking the South Bowl. I talked about that earlier as being an important part of how it was organized. And this is this sort of overview of how the campus would, and the community north, would develop over time. This being the startup portion of the campus, this being the campus footprint itself, and then this being the university community that we're presently planning. No vision is complete without renderings, and this is part of the marketing of the campus. It's one thing to, and those of you working on new campuses understand this, right? Is how do you create that story and extend that story of the future past the present of what people see? And so this has become, a very important part of our narrative. So this notion is that this loop drive that will circulate around the outer reaches of the campus is going to take advantage of this vast open space expanse and really treat it as our ocean, if you will, right? So there's going to be bike paths and public access. It's a public view, and there will be recreational access out to these areas, as long as you don't mind the cows. The open space system is part of our stormwater management program. It's part of our sustainability and part of our irrigation strategy, frankly, where we're hoping to store water for the Merced Irrigation District as well as ourselves. And then building these buildings around these bowls, both recreational facilities as well as student services facilities, is an important part of engaging these open spaces. The idea is, from a flood control standpoint, and there's various sort of very rigorous flood control regulations in California, is that we can handle the regular storms, but in the 100-year event, we might have to flood our recreational fields. So again, it's all part of that long-range topographic planning of the campus. This looks at one of these main streets. Again, the notion is that while the students may live above or the research may happen on the second floor, that all the stuff that serves people on a regular, active, daily basis is located along the ground floor. So combining student services with commercial services, classrooms, auditoriums, and things like that is part of making for an active street life within the campus. And then how we engage with the community in this town gown district where the campus meets the town center is also a really important part of what we're trying to create here. So having this public space that sort of brings the campus and the community together is an important part of the urban planning. As I tell people, this is where you go, for the revolution, I guess, is, the way you think about it. This looks at a future development sort of toward the end of that town gown area where you might get corporate interests or you might have cultural facilities that become part of the campus plan. And then this looks at the heart of the campus in the future, which is this grand ellipse that's in the middle of the academic core. That might not happen for 30 years, but creating an idea and then watching it unfold over time is part of what becoming a part of the UC Merced campus becomes. And we had a space like this in the Galen Howard plan at Berkeley that after World War II, they filled it up with these temporary buildings for like 50 years. And they were just like, these kind of grody wood buildings, that were sort of rotting away by the time I got there. And when we tore those buildings down and reopened that central space and sort of put back in that original idea, it completely changed the character of the campus. And I think that was one of the things that came out of the student group who participated in the planning of the campus, was this notion that they wanted some grand central open space, not just something that was up in the neighborhoods, but something that was right in the middle of the campus core. And then this is our gateway district, where we hope to bring campus research enterprise and public research enterprise together, connected to the regional circulation system and connected to the larger community, hoping to generate perhaps as many as 5,000 jobs in this area. So there's our 104 acres. This is how it phases out in 5 and 10,000 student increments. And now I think I'm overreaching time. I want to leave time for questions and answers. So I'm just going to roll you real quickly through the university community, the Gateway District, the town center, the neighborhoods. These are some of the goals of that community, not just to support campus development, but also to create and capture value. As Keith said, the funding model for public universities is breaking down throughout the country, but particularly in California these days. And so we've been looking at what the build-out model for that university community might be and how it might actually generate enough cash about 50 years from now to continue to fund university development into the future as it develops. So modeling sustainability and generating jobs for students and for the region is another part of that. So we've kind of hardwired the campus plan to the community plan in several areas, as I mentioned, the gateway, the town center, the neighborhoods, and in the joint use of recreational facilities. We're starting to develop more evolved plans of this to interest developers. Again, it's as much marketing as it is anything else. How to bring people to a region that is at the epicenter of the foreclosure market over the next 5 to 10 years is going to be a real challenge for us. We've developed block types and so forth, and And then the last thing I'll leave you with is that we're also engaged in conversations with these major solar power provider entities. Our current solar power system is a third-party purchase agreement. Basically, we agreed to buy electricity from them for 11 cents a kilowatt. They invested all the infrastructure. They put the facility in. Now we're looking at something that might be more on the scale of 18 megawatts that would power up the campus and the community and potentially generate revenue in the interim until the campus develops to a point where it might require that kind of power. So there you have it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating, your scouting of the 10-mile radius, because that's very much something that we think about here in a very urban place. And I think this idea that it's translatable as a campus idea, and that the idea of the modern campus is something that is in its very nature urban, even though you're in what you said is the largest agricultural district in perhaps our country. So if you would both like to take a seat up front, we'll open up to questions from the audience. Yes.
If that is such a vast plan, if you could please tell us about who was involved in the design of it.
The initial plan was developed by a consortium of Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, Barbara Maloney, Richard Bender, who was the former dean of the College of Environmental Design. But when I came on in 2005, we didn't necessarily have the same kind of resources to go out and hire a large planning firm, and we also didn't have a lot of time. We targeted an 18-month period from the time we sort of came to an agreement with the federal agencies about our footprint before we wanted to take a new plan to the regions, and we wanted to have a public process. So because I'd spent a number of years as a private consultant, I sort of knew how to organize a team. So I sort of handpicked a series of very seasoned professionals who were operating small firms, and we put together the process and we put together the plan over about an 18-month period. They included a gentleman by the name of Bruce Race, who's now an assistant professor at Ball State University. Cliff Lowe is a landscape architect, former partner with SWA. Paul Heath, it was a programming expert architect with a company called Workplace Strategies out of, I think he's in Santa Fe. And Andy Plesha from the Plesha Company was our development expert who sort of looked at some of the urban services and development issues. And then my staff.
That was quite an accomplishment, but perhaps even more difficult is after you have come up with a plan, the people that you presented to and getting it approved in the college, I mean, not government agencies. Mm-hmm. How did that go?
We experienced a lot of support within the system and by the Office of the President and the Regents. I think everybody was, the federal permitting process took ultimately an 8-year time frame. So everybody was sort of happy to get it behind them and actually have a plan in place that we could start to figure out how to build. I think that the real support for the physical plan was strong, and for the sustainability goals are also very strong. I think that the challenge, as Keith mentioned earlier, is that the state is staring into a hole as far as its budget goes, and so figuring out how to fund, particularly the next 10 years of growth, will be a real challenge for the state of California. They have us on an enrollment track to be 10,000 students by 2020. You can see when we're adding one building and increasing our space inventory by 25%, that the increments of growth and the rate of growth has to match. The physical growth has to match the student enrollment. It's not like we've got extra space laying around. So we've been working with them on what that program looks like. We're exploring everything from state lease revenue bonds for the near term to potentially private equity sources in the future. Right? There's a movement afoot in the United States to explore private funding of public infrastructure, and we're very much a part of those discussions.
I think the other piece of it is that during the planning phase, Tom put together a whole series of focus groups with students, with faculty, with administrative people, and they were very, very well attended. I mean, people had ideas about what they wanted to see, and I think in the end, the vast majority of people saw something that they wanted in that campus, and there was, in my mind, there was very, very good support behind it. So.
Yes.
Since you're drawing the surrounding valley student population, are the majority of them residential students, or do you have a lot of commuters? And if so, what does that car factor do to your
We actually draw surprisingly from throughout California, and the only two campuses that, and shock you, it shocked me, are UC Berkeley and Merced are the only two that are not regionally specific campuses. Even UCLA draws about 65% of its kids from the LA basin area. So there is a problem with kids driving. There's no doubt about it. And right now, housing in Merced, the original plan was that we would house 50% of our students on campus. We now house about a third of the students, and I think it's going to get worse than that over the coming few years. The other thing that we're trying to do now, though, is to make certain that you get a 2-year commitment to a dorm space, if that's what you want, that you can stay there for the first 2 years. Right now, housing in the community, Tom mentioned the issue about foreclosures, which is the good news about that is that there's a lot of very cheap housing available for students, and I know 3 or 4 of them get together and they pay a couple $100s a month for rent, so it's good. But that's going to go away over a period of time, and we're going to need to really ramp up the on-campus housing in order to do that. So.
Where do you get your water from? And does it limit your growth? Are you allocated a certain amount of water, or is it unlimited?
It is an arid area, and water is a huge issue in the Central Valley. There's a real sort of political and technical play going on between surface water and groundwater, right? The campus is served by a well that was built by the city of Merced to serve the entire northeastern area. I think they have plans for several more wells. Principally, they use groundwater for that. What we're hoping to do by cutting our consumption, and we've had pretty good success so far, and then going to non-potable sources for the irrigation, which would probably be some of the surface water that's running through the canals that are going through the campus, is to really minimize the amount of water consumption and to sort of model for the community what is possible, what's achievable in terms of limiting or lowering the actual consumption of water that comes along with development. I mean, heretofore, I think in some Central Valley towns, they don't even have water meters, right? It's just a flat rate for water, and if you have a pool, they charge you an extra, $15 a month or something. So the politics and the economy of water is really changing in the valley, and we're sort of part of that shift.
Does the aquifer flowing?
There are several debates about that, the rate at which it's going, but because the Central Valley, except for maybe areas like Fresno, have not experienced the kind of growth like you see in the Southwest, like in Tucson or Phoenix and places like that. The notion of the rapid drawdown has not been sort of on anybody's radar.
There are a few areas in the valley that have shown some subsidence, and it's areas where farmers have gone in and have been pulling from groundwater for a number of decades. And there are also a number of areas where the salinity of the soil has gotten so bad that they've had to take the land out of crop rotation. So
It's not going to be a factor for your growth.
Yeah, I think it will be a factor for us. I mean, I think all these things are factors, but I think the plan, as it's put out, is to basically minimize our water use, and there are lots of things you can do that can minimize water. I think the main usage in the valley is ag, and farmers complain every time there's any reduction in the water amount, but it's not even clear that the amounts that they get are actually what is needed for them to raise the crops that they want to raise. And the fact that we don't have an ag school, but we do have an engineering school where there's a lot of work going on in remote sensing and being able to look at the water that's at the plant itself and the level of moisture in the soil, and then signaling when water would be delivered to the plants or pollution runoff from ag fields. These are things that our faculty are very involved in. So, I think there are better ways of doing it. I mean, clearly you don't grow crops that need a huge amount of water. I mean, there's still a lot of rice growing in Merced County, and they use something in the neighborhood of 7 acre-feet of water for each crop, and which is down from what it was. It was 9, now it's down to 7. But it's still not a good crop to grow in a very arid area like that. There was a question over here.
Yeah, I have a question about your faculty. I'm curious where you're getting, it sounds like there was some junior faculty that were coming from.
Yeah.
I'm also wondering if, given the very diverse nature of your student body, if you have a similar institution.
No. I wish we did. The faculty have literally come from all over the country and from outside the country. I mean, clearly there's a tendency to draw from other UCs, and I would say that probably 50% of our faculty have had some piece of their education, whether it's as their baccalaureate degree or a postdoc. They have been at another UC campus at some point in their career. But we've got faculty from East Coast, we've got people from Europe and South America, and no, they don't look like our student body. And it's starting to impact us a little bit. I mean, the students, I believe, have been extraordinarily reserved about this. Our students are great kids. I mean, it shocks me compared to all the stories you hear about the Berkeley kids, but our kids are so polite and nice and determined, okay, very determined. But it's starting now that, they differentiate. We have a fairly significant number of Hispanic faculty. About 20% of our faculty is Hispanic, but they're not Chicano. And the students differentiate. I mean, they're from Mexico, and they want to see people that have succeeded in this country that look like them and came from the same backgrounds that they came from. Our staff, in contrast, is very diverse also. I mean, I've never looked at the numbers to know if they're exactly like the students, but they're pretty close to the student numbers. So.
Regarding the neighborhood, did you develop design guidelines? I'm just curious how you will develop that area, if you'll be able to exercise the same control of the architecture that you have been on campus. And the streetscape.
Right.
The same questions.
Did everybody hear the question? I don't know. Okay. So a couple things. One is we're developing guidelines now for the district level planning. As I mentioned, some of the stuff is going to be pretty far out in time. So what we're interested in doing in the near term is setting some of these larger sort of parameters for development and using the current development plans of the campus to model that future and to test it. It's sort of like an experiment station. Like working, finding the right consultants who know how to think that way is interesting. It's more challenging than I would have thought it would be. But people are coming around and trying to figure out how to develop a landscape that is not, it's urban, but not the way you think of it urban now, right? It's not all concrete, curb and gutter and asphalt and all that sort of stuff, but it's a system that will sort of retard and retain some of the water flows. It'll be sort of self-cleansing. And then with respect to the architecture, we're looking at sort of an urban model where you set typologies, right? You set street walls, you set development, sort of performance parameters, but not real hard design guidelines to the extent that you're trying to force a style on an area. Because you sort of think style will evolve a little bit. We also don't want it to get too cheap, but so the qualitative aspects of that will be important. And one of the ways that we do that is we have a campus design review committee that's comprised of professionals who have either worked on campus or are familiar with UC campuses. And then when we get to the community, we're looking at extending their authority over the community itself. One of the big points of discussion right now, well, I don't know, we're actually not even talking about it yet, we're just thinking about it. But the original intention was to have the county or the city do the entitlement process for the development of the university community. But because the regents actually have state level constitutional autonomy from local land use control, we're actually looking at having the regents be the entitling agency for the community so that we can maintain a higher level of qualitative control. It'll also allow us to be a little bit more patient about development, because in an area where development is likely to take a long time to regain momentum, we want to make sure that we're not just out, going for the first cheap development, that we're actually waiting and holding the market out for some more qualitative stuff.
Great. Yes.
Just kind of building a little bit on that last question, I was wondering a little bit about kind of the very gridded plan of the campus that, you know, with the exception of these kind of iconic green belts that are pretty strong spaces, but it seems to almost imagine the campus as a kind of city, which is a different typology of a campus than some other ways of thinking about going about designing campus.
Correct.
It's the idea of you almost can't tell where the campus ends and the community begins, at least in plans, and sort of the seamless connection. I'm just wondering about that model. You talked about sort of student life preparing them for urban life and that kind of thing. Was that something that came out of kind of the academic philosophy, or was that something that came out of the community meetings and things that were sort of what the origin for that idea?
You know, I'll have to say that part of it probably came more from, you know, some of the original thinking that was done, and then some of the thinking that our team did, in particular with respect to going through the process with the federal agencies, reassuring them that there was sufficient land coverage that they didn't, you know, couldn't take another 250 acres, right? So a lot of people, even on the campus in the planning process, were thinking, gee, are all those blue blocks, like those are each buildings, right? Are those whole buildings? So that was one of the reasons why we developed the typologies. We're looking at an FAR, floor area ratio, which is about 1 square foot of building for every square foot of land on average as a net density. So it's not as dense as one might imagine. But by setting up guidelines like no more than 30% site coverage, so you've got enough site open to, you know, retain the water, filter the water, for example, or provide incidental parking or service areas, is part of the sort of design parameter to sort of push us from 3 to 4-story buildings and maybe, you know, 5 or 6-story buildings in subsequent phases. So it's not perhaps quite as urban as it might seem when you read the grid. So I didn't really show it very long, but there was a Google Sketchup model at the very end there, sort of a green and white overlay, where we actually tried to model this physically so people could see that, in fact, there was enough, you know, green space to go around. So that's a good question.